Garrod, and I am the DOCARE Legal Fellow. Let me just get this mic a little bit taller.
There you go.
All right, thank you. All right, and I'm going to talk to you today about legal support for conservation and enforcement. So, in Hawaii, the Department of Land and Natural Resources, as was mentioned, is charged with managing over 1 million acres of land in coastal waters. And the department here has its own division dedicated to enforcing its laws and rules, and that is the Division of Conservation and Resource Enforcement, or as we affectionately call it, DOCARE. And officers for DOCARE are known as Conservation Resource Enforcement Officers, or CREOs, and they are vested with full police powers to enforce all of the laws of Hawaii, and especially those rules written by the department. I'm going to discuss with you today the DOCARE Legal Fellow position and help describe how it helps to strengthen the enforcement chain in Hawaii. Before I get rolling, I want to mention that this position is funded through a pair of great grants from the NOAA Coral Reef Conservation Program as well as the Castle Foundation, and with much help, support, and aloha from the Environmental Law Program. A little bit about myself. I grew up here fishing, diving, surfing in the water using the resources. I'm not award-winning, but I like to think accomplished in my own right. So being a resource user, growing up here, I did notice a decline in the resources, the size and quantity of fish, as well as the health of the reefs, and I really wanted to do something about that, and I decided that going into law would probably be the best choice with my particular skill set. I wanted to develop the best possible set of tools that I could use to aid in the protection of our natural resources. So I decided to come and attend law school here at Richardson, where I got my environmental law certificate and my JD, and I wrote my thesis on implementing a non-commercial marine fishing license system here in Hawaii, along with the possible benefits and barriers to implementation of such a system. A little while after graduation, I found myself at the prosecutor's office, where I spent a lot of time and gained a lot of experience conducting misdemeanor trials, as well as lots and lots of case preparation. And after that, I found myself here with the department, with DOCARE, and in this fellowship, doing something that I really love, focusing on the natural environment. I'm going to give you a really quick background on the enforcement chain here in Hawaii. A former fellow, Wayne Tanaka, did an enforcement chain analysis, and just a brief background on him, because you're probably going to hear his name come up a few more times, is he was a Richardson graduate, a Division of Aquatic Resources Marine Law Fellow. He worked with Conservation International, and now he is working with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. In his analysis, he described the enforcement chain in Hawaii as starting with education, detection and interdiction, prosecution and adjudication, and then sanctions. And he identifies the functions of enforcement as education, deterrence, rehabilitation, restoration, and community engagement. And through his analysis, he developed some recommendations, such as strengthening interagency and interdivisional relationships and communication, as well as improving efficiency of the current enforcement process through facilitating improved educational outreach and enhanced communication between the divisions such as DAR, DOCARE, the prosecutor's office, as well as other divisions within the department. And from this came recommendations of creating new positions to aid in the facilitation of these goals. And to get into the DOCARE Legal Fellow, the role of the Legal Fellow is to support the DOCARE in coral reef management related issues by tracking criminal resource cases and gathering data on dispositions, as well as implementing a citation data system to enhance collaboration between divisions like the Division of Aquatic Resources, Resource Enforcement, and the Prosecutor's Office. Another one is to create a report writing curriculum, for the newly implemented DOCARE Academy, and assist with the statewide rollout of ASSET. This is what David had mentioned prior, is the Alternative Sentencing and Supplemental Education and Training Program. as well as provide critical legal support on special projects related to coral reef resources. Additionally, the DOCARE Legal Fellow will help strengthen DOCARE's coral reef enforcement effectiveness through conducting administrative enforcement proceedings, supporting criminal enforcement proceedings, collaborating on the implementation of the CRVS. This is also the Civil Resource Violation System, which David had mentioned earlier, as well as supporting DOCARE on the review of a non-commercial fishing license program. What you're looking at now is a chart with disposition data from cases ranging from September of last year to February of this year. And this is data gathered from DOCARE in just the First Circuit District Court of Honolulu. The blue portion represents charges that have been altered or dismissed. And when charges are altered, it's when they're amended down in a plea deal, oftentimes to a simple trespass, which is a violation which avoids the enhanced sentencing structure that's written into a lot of our penalties. So it's not really great for us, because if we have a repeat offender, the second time they offend, if their first time it was amended, the second offense will be, in the eyes of the court, a first offense. And we have to go after them for a lower penalty. The yellow portion reflects dispositions of cases where the defendant pled or was found guilty on the original charge and was given the correct penalty. My goal, one of my major goals, is to increase the size of this yellow slice. And so here's some ways that I'm trying to help do that. One, by supporting the CREOs, that's the Conservation and Resource Enforcement Officers. I provide real-time assistance for officers in the field questions. They all have my personal phone number. They can call me anytime, any day or night, weekend or not. And I'll answer questions on authority to act, when they can act, or interpretation of a particular enforcement rule which may not have been used prior. I help them with case preparation. I help them decide a course of action and how to approach certain violations, whether it is to provide an educational warning, to use a wait and see approach, or to immediately cite. A new project that we've just recently implemented is case screening. And before any reports get distributed to the prosecutors or the courts, they come to my desk for my personal review. And this is where my experience at the prosecutor's office comes in handy, because I did a lot of case screening there as well. I make sure that the reports are solid, aren't missing any pieces, and this just helps to ensure that we get the strongest possible reports for the best possible dispositions before we distribute to the courts and the prosecutor's office. Another major role I have with the enforcement officers is discussing difficulties with their enforcement, whether it's in the field or actually in the courtrooms. And this is something that David had also mentioned. Sometimes rules may be written in a way that makes them difficult to enforce. And this can be something as small as having an and where there should be an or. And when we have these issues, it's great because we have this legal fellow program. We have points of contacts in all these divisions where I can reach out to David or Todd and tell them that we have an issue with this rule and the officers are unable to enforce it. And that brings it to their attention so that they can address it in their next rulemaking session. I additionally work with the prosecutors, and I support them in court and out of court, and I connect them to our enforcement officers. And a lot of times this is me meeting with them in person or calling them on the phone prior to trial to discuss the significance of offense, such as, for example, how destructive lay nets can be and why they're so regulated. Because to a prosecutor who's never used the resource, they may not really understand how important this is. And I just help to educate them ahead of time so that they give it each case the attention that it needs, because there is a heavy caseload and it's really easy to overlook something. So I just show them the importance of these offenses. And it could also be discussing to them not just nets, like how harvesting a juvenile fish before it gets a chance to reproduce can be really harmful to a fishery population which is already in decline. I discuss with the prosecutors desired dispositions, such as recommending a maximum penalty for an especially heinous offense, or forfeiture and destruction of gear. The idea behind this is that we wouldn't give a murderer back a gun, we wouldn't give a drug addict back a pipe, and we're not going to give a poacher back his nets. I discussed with them when to argue against deferral. A lot of first-time offenders will get their pleas deferred, and it's called a DANK, a deferred acceptance of a no contest plea. Basically, the judge assigns a probationary period. If they don't repeat offend within a month or two or whatever they assign, the plea is deferred and it goes away. And that again avoids an enhanced sentencing scheme of our statutes. So I'm actually writing a memo for the prosecutors to use and cite in court as to with appropriate case law, which isn't very well known, but it is strong case law from our Supreme Court that states that many of our resource violations are not deferrable. I help track penalty sections. Our administrative rules and our revised statutes can sometimes be hard to navigate. So to save time for the prosecutors in the courts, I provide them with the appropriate penalties for each offense with the section numbers so they can easily and readily cite it in court upon request from the judge. And another very important role is I connect the prosecutors with the resource enforcement officers. I'm a liaison between the department and the prosecutors, and I connect the prosecutors to their witnesses to ensure that there's a thorough understanding of the case, which leads to increased convictions. Just to share a couple success stories. I can't take credit for a lot of these personally. These come from our officers and their great work, and I'm just on the side supporting them. One example, the picture on the left is from March, and this is in reference to a fairly new DLNR tip app we have for the public to use to let our department know when they see possible violations. And via the tip app in March, the DLNR was notified of potential illegal activity in Kahana Bay, which is on the east side of our island. And this led to officers citing 2 men for the illegal take of mullet out of season with the use of unregistered lay nets. Another success story was earlier this year in January. A man was cited twice in 2 weeks for using unregistered lay nets in an area where the use of these nets is prohibited at night, a time in which lay netting is prohibited, and with species of fish that were both out of season and over their particular bag limit. And this is really important because this individual is known to our department and our division as we call him a serial poacher. And although we're not, putting him away, he's not in jail, we are confiscating his gear. We have thousands of feet of his nets, which are worth thousands of dollars, which makes it really difficult for him to operate effectively. And just recently we've gotten his kayak that he uses as well. So we're just trying our best to get him out of the water. And another success story, which I think Luna and Carlton can talk about a little bit later, is the newly implemented DOCARE Academy, which is going to be for training new officers. But I'm not going to go into that. I'll let them talk about it. Okay. And just quickly mentioning a couple challenges and difficulties. I'm an Oahu-based legal fellow, so I'm mainly able to focus on the District of Oahu on cases from here. Geographically limited to the 5 courts on Oahu, and it's difficult to provide the same level of assistance and give the same attention to cases originating from the outer islands. Another barrier that we come into is the issue of traditional and customary Native Hawaiian rights claims. And if you're not familiar with that, briefly, sometimes a particular act may not be a violation if it fits into the protections provided to Native Hawaiians under the state's constitution. And it can be hard to tell when this is actually the case. And so further training is needed for officers and to provide them with a set of questions and the appropriate knowledge to address these claims when they arise. We don't want to create unnecessary litigation, so education and training is going to be the key on this. And as you have heard and will repeatedly hear, funding is a perpetual issue. Just to restate, the department manages over 1 million acres with just about 1% of the budget, and we are all doing the best we can with what we have. And that's why grant-funded positions like this are so invaluable and so helpful and so important. And I think that's about all the time I have. So thank you very much. Are there any questions? I'll do my best to answer.
I always have
couple of comments. One is he's so embarrassed because I took photos of him, but I'm so proud, And I can see you looking like, she's taking photos of me. I couldn't be more proud because I think this is your first big presentation as a law fellow. And didn't he do a wonderful job? I'm just... And he just graduated in May. It's amazing. And you may not be award-winning, but... you can tell the experience he had at the prosecutor's office. I mean, how it perfectly dovetails and makes him more effective. So, sorry, I just have to say, proud mama or auntie or something. So, questions for Ian before Luna comes up. Questions?
Yes.
The circuit court actions, if they're primarily against recreational users or fishermen or commercial fishermen. And also, if you've been there long enough to have an opinion on whether alternative sentencing, like education, is maybe more effective than some of the other penalties you were talking about.
So since I've been with the department, I've been with the department since April, but I haven't seen any circuit court actions yet, so I can't really speak to that. But I am of the opinion that the alternative sentencing is often more appropriate for first-time offenders who really need more of an education rather than large offenders that would appear in the circuit court. Perhaps, David, do you have something to say to that? Yeah? No? Okay. Sorry, just going to punt it.
I'll be speaking later about the environmental court and address a little bit about the difference between circuit court and district court. So I'll return to that. I must say that the education program that we've been working on for a long time, it's not all success stories. We've run into a lot of bumps, right? And that's one of the bumps. We haven't been able to fully roll it out, even though you're going to hear from Luna that the curriculum is all ready to go. So, and the sentencing community service component I'll return to later. There have been some community service sentences at the district court level. It's nascent, right? It's just getting going. So we'll return to that because that's a really important part of the toolkit we're trying to expand. So good question. One more question for Ian?
Yes.
Do you have an example of a case study where a particular method was kind of accepted under the DOCARE standards for harvesting marine resources?
So, for the most part, it may not.
Let him give his name
Okay.
and repeat
Yeah.
the question just for the
Okay.
video.
To give my name.
Try again.
Can I stay anonymous?
Sure.
So this is Mr. Anonymous, but so the question is do you have an example of a case study in DLNR's archives where a traditional method was actually accepted under whatever the statutes or guidelines under harvesting marine resources is?
So, more so than a method, it comes down to a lot of times an access issue or an area.
Okay.
Rather, if it's a closed area, it may not necessarily be closed to someone if it's under their traditional and customary rights.
I'm going to add to that as we get to the next question, which is now, and maybe Luna or Carlton can speak to this. There were actually permits eventually, it took a long time, granted specifically for traditional and customary users, but it was quite a process. So I think this is a big challenge. How do you, on the fly, if an officer's in the field versus is it a permit system?
So I think one, we kind of had the same problem where we tried to establish this native fishing rights memorandum, right? But the question is, so how do you prove within range that this person is actually ancestral to the land or native or whatever classification?
So I'm going to have Luna address that too, but go ahead.
And I just agree with you that is something that is presenting ongoing challenges.
We had one more question.
Yeah, I JP Oriole, just two quick questions.
Sure.
I like the idea of the tip app as a tool, but who does that go to in the department, and then response time from receipt to filtering out to the agent actually getting there? And then my second question is, I mean, you mentioned your serial poacher.
Yes.
And do your rules and regulations allow for elevating something that's misdemeanor to actually get to criminal by the time you're a seriously repeat offender?
So currently we're maxed out at misdemeanor, but I think that is something that is definitely should be addressed in the future because for serious repeat offenders, we eventually want to be able to go after them for more than a maximum misdemeanor penalty. And as far as the first question, yeah, I think that's a great thing for the segue into Luna over here.
Let's thank